I want to take some time to address a dangerous false teaching that is rapidly spreading on the internet and by other means these days. It is the idea that the Hebrew alphabet still maintains a pictographic meaning, and that if you understand the original pictographic meaning of the letters, you can then get more insight into the scriptures. This is completely false. It is 100% without merit, but I don't just want you to take my word for it. I want to explain it so you'll be able to understand and then let this nonsense disappear. For those who don't know me, my PhD from NYU is in Near Eastern languages and literatures. This is a field I have worked in on a scholarly level for decades. I'm not talking about disputed things. I'm not talking about questionable things. Everything I'm going to lay out in this video is plain and simple and universally recognized by top Semitic scholars and Hebrew scholars. So let's start here. Let's start and understand how we go from pictograph to alphabet. In other words, from writings that just use various pictures, and they start with that, and then it goes from pictures to syllables, and then syllables to an alphabet, and that alphabet no longer retains any connection to the original pictograph meanings. Listen to what Professor Joseph Nave has to say in his book, Early History of the Alphabet. He writes this: hieroglyph is a Greek word meaning sacred carving. When the Greeks occupied Egypt, they were impressed by the monumental inscriptions engraved on the walls of the Egyptian temples. However, hieroglyphic writing was used not only for engraving text, but also and primarily as a pictographic script consisting of drawn pictures. As in Sumerian writing, each pictograph initially designated a word, and later there evolved a series of syllabic symbols. So let's take a look at this. Let's understand this. If you've seen hieroglyphs, you know what they look like. In fact, let's take a look at some hieroglyphs, hieroglyphic inscription, and you see here all the different images that are used. And you see, you've got something that looks like a man or an old man sitting on a throne. You've got something that looks like a hawk or a falcon. You've got various animals. You've got legs, and so these are typical hieroglyphs. You can see they are originally pictures, and that's why there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. Just look at all the different images. So leg, that could stand for walk, or bird could stand for a particular bird, or for flying, and that's how pictographs would work. So, if you look at, for example, the original Chinese alphabet, that is also several thousand characters. Ancient hieroglyphs, several thousand characters. Ancient Sumerian pictographs, several thousand characters. So Nave explains it like this. He writes this: initially, pictures were scratched on tablets to designate various words. In time, they improved their writing. The pictographs gave way to wedge-shaped linear signs, which were impressed by a stylus on the wet clay, and many signs came to indicate syllables. This is what's called cuneiform. So in other words, that looks like chicken feet. If you've ever seen the inscriptions just with a stylus engraved, that looks like chicken feet, called cuneiform or wedge-shaped. So you went from the pictures to then putting it in wedge shapes, and then you went from just pictures to what do those pictures represent with sounds, and then that developed into syllables. Are you with me so far? Let's take a look at this, and we'll see, say, from Sumerian into cuneiform. Let's take a look. So, for example, ancient Sumerian, there you've got sog, head, okay? And then after its initial writing, then at a certain point it gets turned on its side, and then it comes into wedge-shaped cuneiform. So you can see by the time you get to 1000 BC, that was around the time of King David, it's no longer looking like a head at all right? Or the same thing with shoe, hand. You see, originally, there it is with fingers, a thumb, that's a hand. Then it gets turned a certain way. Then by the time it gets to cuneiform, you'd have to know that originally it meant hand. All right, the same thing with ninda, bread. You can see by the time you get to the end, cuneiform, you won't know that that's bread. So what happened was that with these signs, they now came to, they could represent the word or they could represent the syllables. That's the big thing. Well, now they no longer represented pictures, they represented syllables, okay? So it could be shu, sha, sh. It could be ash, osh, oosh. That's how it would go. It was no longer a picture. It was now a sound, a syllable. So let's take a look at the cuneiform script. This is called Akkadian. If you've heard of Hammurabi's Code, it was written in this. This is the language of the ancient Babylonians and Assyrians. So you can see these pictographs originally were pictures. Now they're just wedge-shaped. They're no longer pictures. They are now just sounds. Na, ah, sha, shu, gal, ki, mu, ma. All right? That's how it develops. From pictographs now to cuneiform to wedge shape, and you only had about 600 of those. So you went from, say, 3,000 pictographs to maybe 600 that represented various syllables and sounds. Some of them could still represent the thing, like the word that follows this is a word for a god, all right? Or it could just be the syllables involved in the name for God, and that's how it developed. Now, Joseph Nave is going to further explain the development. I hope you're with me. It's really important you understand the development. By the time we get to the alphabet, it bears no connection whatsoever to pictographs anymore. Zero. And to try to read the pictograph meaning into the Hebrew Bible is just like trying to read it into my name or your name in English. It does not work. It is completely 100% bogus, and it's dangerous because you can read in anything that you want to read in. You can create anything you want to create. So let's go back to Professor Joseph Nave. Here's what he has to say. The turning point that marks the beginning of modern research on the origin of the alphabet was Flinders Petrie's discovery in 1905 of the temple at Serbit al-Khadem on the Sinai Peninsula. In this temple, dedicated to the Egyptian goddess Hathor and the turquoise mines nearby, there came to light about a score of relatively short inscriptions in a formerly unknown script. The script consisted of pictures, but these pictographs numbered fewer than 30. It was soon realized that this was an alphabetic, albeit pictographic script. All right, so here's what Professor Nave is saying. That you went from 3,000 pictographs, because you need all these different pictures to depict things, right? You went from there to a few hundred now syllabic signs. Now you go to about 30. You think, what? How can you convey things with just 30 pictures? Picture if I sit around, I want you to communicate, and you have 30 pictures to work with. You can use a car, you can use a plane, you can use an adult, you can use a child. How in the world are we going to communicate language sentences? So when you see just 30, that's telling you, oh, this is an alphabet. This is one of the first instances of an alphabet, just like our English alphabet, that it's not a picture, all right? It's not a pictograph. It is simply a sound, A, B, C. Well, what does the A come from? What does the B come from? That doesn't matter. A is A and B is B. It is an alphabet, and that's how it works. Professor Nave continues. Listen, the first step towards its decipherment was made in 1916 by Gardner, who pointed out that in these so-called Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions, a certain series of pictures recurred several times. Ox goad, house, eye, ox goad, cross. He suggested that these pictographs have acrophonic values of the equivalent Canaanite words, lam, beit, ayin, lam, tav. That is, each picture symbolizes not the depicted word, but only its initial sound. What is acrophonic? It's telling you that the letter represents the first sound of the picture it originally represented. So the letter that originally was a picture of, say, the word house, by it, all it is now is ba. That's what it is, period. That's simple. Or the letter that originally came from the picture delet, door, is just duh. It is acrophonic. It is simply the first sound. And as the scholars were deciphering this, it's like, well, of course, it's not ox goad, house, I go. What's the meaning of ox goad, house? No. These are letters. It's an alphabet. Let me go a little further. This is Professor John Healy in the book Reading the Past, Ancient Writing from Cuneiform to the Alphabet. This is what he has to say. This achievement, namely of the invention of the alphabet, is essentially the insight that writing could be most easily organized if each distinct single sound of a particular language were represented by a single distinctive sign. Since the number of separate sounds is in most languages rather small, the number of signs needed is also rather small, about 40 at the most. If we compare this with the writing systems already then in existence, though it seems unlikely that the inventor of the alphabet was an expert in any of these older systems, it implies a glorious simplification. So let's see where things went. Let's see how they developed. Let's go from ancient Egyptian to the Roman script, which is what we use today. Let's take a look at this. So 3000 BC, that's an ox head, right? Pretty clearly an ox head. And then that would have been a representation of it. And then, whatever cattle you're talking about, okay, so it would come from there. All right, now, by the time you get a little over 1,000 years later, Sinai and some of these other early inscriptions, you can see it still bears those characteristics, but not so much. The Phoenician alphabet, which was then borrowed by the Hebrews and the Greeks, look, it doesn't really look like an ox head anymore. If you looked at that, if I showed that to 100 people and said, what is that? They're not going to say, that's obviously an ox head. Now, as is borrowed by Greeks, look at the Greek alpha, looks more just like a flag. And then as it's borrowed into the Roman alphabet, which is our English alphabet, there's a letter A. Okay? Our letter A originally comes from ox head. Does that mean that when you see the letter A in English, that you could say, oh, that we have to understand that's originally ox head? No, that's bogus. That's complete nonsense. That's idiocy. That is linguistic, alphabetic idiocy to try to do that. The letter B, what does that come from? That comes from the Roman alphabet, which is borrowed from the Greek alphabet, which is borrowed from the Phoenician alphabet, same as the Hebrew. That originally, that B was originally buy it, house. It looked like an enclosure. Oh, so in the name Brown, the first means bait, buy it, house. So it has to do with house. No. Do you understand the insanity of it? It's just the same doing it with the Hebrew. Here, let's take a look at the development of the Hebrew letter Aleph, all right? So Phoenician form, you see it originally, this is ox head. You see it, it's now on its side, no longer bears any resemblance to an ox head. Now it goes into Hebrew script, and you see in the Hebrew script, what? That's got nothing to do, the Hebrew Aramaic script, that's got nothing to do with an ox head. Of course not, because it has no connection. It's just a letter. It's just the letter Aleph. And then look in Syriac, to completely change it. Arabic is just a straight line. Why? Because they're just letters. They're not pictographs. They have no pictographic meaning. I can guarantee you that if you asked 1,000 Israelites in the ancient world that knew how to read, and they could read the alphabet, and if you said, explain this in pictographic form, they'd have no more clue what you were talking about than if you talked about, I just came from a mission to Mars. These are just letters. Just like in English, they're just letters, and in Greek, they're just letters. They go back to the same original alphabet, and that alphabet goes back to pictographs, but once it becomes an alphabet, it's no longer pictographic. It just represents the initial sounds of what those words once were, period. So now, here's the way it's taught. Here's the way people want us to get it today. And I'm not mentioning books of authors who've become well known for this stuff. I'm not calling out websites. I don't want to embarrass anybody anymore. Once, if they will come to grips with the truth of what I'm saying, they have to pull all their material, renounce it, get rid of the websites, books, and say, I'm sorry for misleading you. But I'm talking more to those who have been misled by these teachers. They may be sincere, they may be orthodox in other things that they believe, but this is false, dangerous, bogus. In a real sense, it's adding to the Bible. In fact, it's creating your own Bible because you can make it mean whatever you want it to mean. So let's look at this, okay? Here's a chart, and we see, here's the pictograph. All right, so we just start with Aleph, originally the pictograph, ox. Well, if it's ox, then it could mean strength. It could mean leader. So now we start to deduce more things from this, right? Baked goes back to buy it, house, or it could mean in. Or gimel, is it foot or camel? Well, it could be pride. And dalet, tent, door. Well, maybe that means pathway. And so now you can start reading into things whatever you want. So if I was looking at my name, okay, Brown, so that would be house. And then I go down to the resh, house, head. Maybe because I'm the head of my house. Could that be in for the O? I'd go to a vav, that's nail, peg. Maybe I'm the head of the house, and I'm like a nail, a peg in the wall. And then vav, that's a hook. And then nun, a seed, or maybe fish, because I'm like a fisher. But it's bogus, nonsense. It's playing games. That's all it is. All right, here's here's going back again. Let's take a look at the Phoenician alphabet. All right, Phoenician alphabet about 1400 BC. All right, and as we look at this, we start on the right, Aleph, Bet. You can see that even though we're told that all these meanings are there, you're not going to know it looking at it. And again, it is simply an alphabet. All right, you want to know what people do with this? You want to know how far they go? You want to know how crazy it becomes? And I plead with you, don't waste your time. It is nonsense. Better look for the latest sighting of Elvis Presley. Better find out if there's life on Mars and if we need to send a mission to Mars to reach the Martians with the gospel. That's more credible. That's more worthy of your time than this nonsense. All right, so let's debunk it once and for all. Let's take a look at Hebrew writings, say from the Dead Sea Scrolls, or Hebrew writings from some documents that we have from even a few hundred years before that in Aramaic or Hebrew. Just look at what the script looks like, okay? So I want you to see this, all right? So Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, this is just an alphabet. There is no pictographic meaning found in any of these words whatsoever. And again, Dead Sea Scrolls or Aramaic inscriptions from other places a couple hundred years earlier, this is how the script would look. And there's nothing pictographic about it whatsoever. It is simply an alphabet. Nonetheless, here's what we're told, okay? This is what we're told. I'm not mentioning the website, but I'm going to take you through what this one website claims, and it's going to go through the first word in Genesis, Bereshit, which is Beit, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Vav, Tav. And this is now allegedly the meaning we're going to get from it. All right, so here we go. So here's the letter Beit. Pictograph could mean house, tent, or that's what it stands for. And the meanings, alleged meanings, family, house, inside. All right, and now Resh, man's head. That's first, top, beginning. So let's just look at the meanings. It's family first, strong, sharp, work, mark. And this is allegedly now all found in the first word of Genesis. This is no more reality, friends, than what I just did with my name Brown, okay? There's no more reality to this than what I just did with my own name, Brown. It is that bogus. So now, and I'm not giving you the website, but here's what this particular author has to say. He's now going to read into, you're going to be shocked to find out what he now reads into this based on the alleged original pictographic meaning. If you sat down with Moses and talked to him about it, you go, what in the world are you talking about? All right, so here we go. While each pictograph has a meaning of its own, Hebrew always form words by combining pictographs to convey an idea. Nonsense! Bogus! In this instance, the first two pictographs, Beit and Resh, form the word bar, which means son of. For instance, Jewish males have their bar mitzvah at age 13, announcing that they are a son of the covenant. So not only are they reading meanings that had no connection whatsoever to the alphabet anymore, not only that, they're now dividing the word up. Okay, let's go. Let's continue. He says this. The next letter is the Aleph, which is depicted as an ox's head, with the ox having the connotation of strength and power. Not surprisingly, this symbol was often associated with God. The symbology of this letter even appears to have been employed by God in the sacrifice of the red heifer, which is a portrayal of Jesus' eventual death at the cross. So in this instance, we could translate this letter as God. The guy's making this up. He's totally 100% making stuff up based on this fundamental misunderstanding. All right, now he continues. Now we come to the letter Shin, which is depicted as two front teeth. This symbol represents the act of biting or pressing against something, or eating or destroying something. It could also represent the number 2, since there are two front teeth in the pictograph. But in this instance, we adopt the idea of being pressed by those consuming teeth. Then there is the Yud, which has the pictograph and extended arm and hand. Since we do our work with our arms and hands, the symbol would point to the ideas of work or effort or throwing something, even throwing worship to God. Of course, it can also have the symbolic meaning of the arm and or hand. I mean, this is staggering. This is staggeringly bizarre. This is staggeringly bizarre beyond the point of any connection to reality. This is pure fantasy. And we're being told this is the hidden meaning in Genesis 1:1 in the opening word. And people are like, wow, that's amazing. That's in the Bible. It's not in the Bible. This has just been made up completely made up. Basically, everything you read here, aside from the fact that many centuries before, these letters originally had a pictographic meaning. Aside from that, everything, every single word you read there was nonsense fantasy. Okay, then he says this. Finally, we have the tav, which is made by crossing two sticks in the shape of a cross, which was the way that the Hebrews actually used sticks to keep the rib cage of a lamb open while they roasted it. This symbol also has the meaning of a marker, sign, or a signal or monument, but in this analysis, we'll just use the idea of a cross, of course. And by the way, a cross in terms of crucifixion or anything like that didn't exist in the world at that point. That was invented by the Romans many centuries later. So here's the message. Are you ready? This is what this guy, well-meaning, I think, this is what he's going to come up with, based on the alleged pictographic meaning, then with all their fantasy stuff built into it in the first word in Genesis. Here we go. When combined, then, the overall message that can be gleaned from this first word of the Bible is the following. The Son of God will be pressed by his own hand on a cross. I'm sorry to laugh. That's the most absurd thing I've ever read. The Son of God will be pressed by his own hand on a cross. Isn't that fascinating? No, it's not fascinating. It's bogus. You just made something up and put it on the Bible. And it's been hiding right there in plain sight for thousands of years. It's not hiding. It's not there. And in case you think that's not what this message is claiming, consider how well the message correlates to everything we know about the destiny of Jesus in this world according to his own words. So in other words, you're going to now take the gospel message and throw it back where it never occurred, and throw it back by dividing up, mixing up, importing meanings into letters that are not there in the Hebrew. Look, if you do this after this video, you're doing it with your eyes wide open. You are willfully deceived. You're willfully deceiving others. Bogus nonsense. I don't care if your books took off. I don't care if your ministry took off. I don't care if your websites took off. You need to pull the books. You need to pull the websites. You need to publicly apologize for misleading people. It is based on false information, and you just read stuff into the Bible. It's not there. I don't care if it's Orthodox gospel. You just made it up in terms of Genesis. So I'm going to give you a series of facts, one after the other. Indisputable, non-negotiable facts. I challenge any scholar on the planet to challenge a word of these, and it's not going to happen because no scholar would. All right. Fact. There is not a single hint that the ancient Greeks, who borrowed the ancient Phoenician alphabet, retained or even understood the original pictographic meaning of the letters. It is the same, friends, with the ancient Hebrews. But Greeks, let's use that as an example. They're borrowing the same alphabet, not a hint that an original pictographic meaning was understood in now the new letters that they were going to be using. Fact. There's not a single hint in a single verse of the Bible that the Hebrew letters are to be understood in a pictographic sense. Not maybe, not possibly, fact. Next fact. There is not a single example in all ancient Jewish literature, talking about thousands of writings of the rabbis, that the Hebrew letters were to be understood in a pictographic sense. Fact. Next fact. There is not a single scholarly dictionary of biblical Hebrew, I own them all, that places any meaning on or derives any definition from the alleged pictographic meanings of the Hebrew letters. And finally, fact. It is a dangerous practice to interpret the Hebrew scriptures based on the alleged pictographic meanings of the letters. To do so is to turn the plain meaning of the Bible into a meaningless code of gibberish and to add one's ideas to the scriptures. All right, listen. You've been warned. We've laid things out. We've made them plain. The Bible, as God gave it to us, is rich enough. Let's explore what God said and not get in the realm of fantasy.